Okay, right, that means I'm good. Okay.
Thank you, David. Welcome to Great. Hi, guys, can you hear me?
This microphone's over here.
Okay, okay. Welcome to Great Trees in Women's Temple. This morning, we are in Sashi. We'll have Teijo do the opening sutra.
And unsurpassed, penetrating and perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even 100,000 million kalpas, having it to see and listen to, remember and accept. I vow to taste the truth of love to Bhagavata's teaching.
Now, brief statement on Dana. In Buddhism, when Zen practitioners share their understanding of the teachings and practice, it is offered freely as a practice of Dana Paramita. Dana is a Pali word that means generosity or to give freely, and this practice is done without expectation of getting something in return. This is the spirit of speaking about the Dharma. Other ways to practice Dana is to offer support to those who share the teachings, to support places of spiritual practice, and to give without judgment or expectation when opportunities arise. Those who share the teachings at Great Tree do so on a Dana basis. Please support their practice by giving what you can. And since this is the Great Tree Sashi, you can go to greattreetemple.org and follow the donate path. Our speaker this morning is the founder and abbess of Great Tree Zen Women's Temple, and she'll be speaking about the precepts this morning. Do you need your glasses?
Here.
Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So we're trying to be deviceless here, and so I didn't put my notes on my computer, so they're down here. I need something that's, I don't know. Anyway, this morning I make these titles for these talks months ahead. And so I wanted to talk about the 16 Bodhisattva precepts because I wanted to let people know that next year is a precepts year at Great Tree. And for those people who would like to receive the precepts or renew the precepts, that our sewing retreat for those who want to receive the precepts will be the first, starting the first Friday in February and going through the following Wednesday. So that's for sewing or Roxu, and then I think in April or May we will have the precept ceremony. So pass the word and plan to come if you can to support those people who are receiving the precepts. It's always nice to do the precepts. We haven't done any on Zoom. We've only done them in person. We have our 2020 precepts with everyone, pictures of everyone wearing masks. So you can't even tell who received it. But so anyway, I did, and this may have, this was the manifestations of the PR about this. My original idea was to talk about Dogen and the precepts. And I realized when I saw that title that I wasn't prepared to talk about Dogen and the precepts, and that I couldn't do it in a week. But Dogen did does have a teaching about the precepts that is written down in the Kyoju Kaimon. And the Kyoju Kaimon, my understanding of the Kyoju Kaimon is that Dogen had a few teachings about the precepts, and then his disciples, his successors, his lineage keepers throughout the years kind of expanded on it. And so the Kyoju Kaimon as my understanding is kind of the interpretation of what Dogen was talking about. But it's very interesting, and we have been reading this book, called Being Upright, which is by Rev Anderson, and Rev has done an extensive study of the Kyoji Kaimo, and I think he's even maybe worked on translations, I'm not sure about that, but he gave some talks at the Jukai, the big ceremony, precept ceremony in last November. And his Shoaku talked about in 3 talks, and then Rev talked about it in I think 2 or 3 talks. And what he was talking about were specifically some of the things that he wrote about in here, which were he was talking specifically about the Bodhisattva precepts. I think Shohaku was giving more of a historical perspective of the Kyoji Kaimo. So all of that to say, we have been reading this, and so some of you who have been in the study group might recognize some of what I'm talking about, although it was last practice period that we were reading these chapters on the refuges and the 3 pure precepts, and then eventually I guess he gets into the 10 grave precepts. But I'm just going to talk about the refuges and the 3 pure precepts. And I'm just going to give kind of some points that he makes. And the reason I think that he's done quite a bit of study about this is because when he talks about these precepts, it comes out very kind of naturally. After his talks out in Los Angeles, I called him and asked him if I could have his notes, because his talks were so good. And he said, well, the problem is I was kind of still writing them as I was walking into my lecture, which means, they were organized in only a way he could understand. But it is a lot of what he talks about in this book. And so I just want to make a few points that he's making here, which are trying his effort in trying to understand what Dogen means, which I feel he kind of nails it, because it really comes from Zazen practice, and he is famous for his Zazen practice. So he starts out in chapter 7, I think, saying, according to Dogen, the essence of the true transmission of the Buddha Dharma is taking refuge in the triple treasures. So these are the first 3 of the 16 Bodhisattva precepts. The three treasures. And so Rev is saying that Dogen says that the heart of the Buddha Dharma is the 3 treasures. And this really struck me this time when I read it, because I had not really thought about that in that way before. But I do know that in all traditions, the 3 treasures are the first precepts that are usually given. Dogen Zenji doesn't make a distinction between the precepts that priests receive and the precepts that lay people receive, because he said we all are doing the same practice. In other Buddhist traditions, they break it down, and first you receive the refuges, and then you receive, I don't exactly, Thich Nhat Hanh does it in his own way, and then I think in other traditions, Tibetan traditions, they start just with the refuges, and I don't know exactly how it goes from there. But we receive them as part of the 16 Bodhisattva precepts, because Dogen's emphasis is on Bodhisattva practice. This is why he says we receive the precepts. So one of the things that Story City tells me here is that evidently when Dogen was very sick, probably on his deathbed, he wrote on a pillar in the middle of his room, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and he frequently would walk around the pillar chanting Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. So this was to kind of emphasize the importance of taking refuge. As I mentioned last night at the full moon ceremony, full moon gathering, the Japanese word for taking refuge is the word kairu. It's a verb that means to return to your home. Not just to return to where you came from, but to return to your home. So when I realized that it had a particular effect on me, because I realized that what Dogen is pointing to, or what the refuges are pointing to, is that we have the three the triple treasure in our experience, in our being. And I say experience because what they're pointing to, what Dogen is pointing to in the three treasures, is that relationship that we are in with life, with all beings. So he also mentions the Pali, which is satana gomana. Satana refers to shelter, protection, or sanctuary, someplace of peace and safety. And one of the things that I keep coming back to in trying to describe the mission of Great Tree is that I want it to be a place of refuge. And I don't know exactly what that means in terms of the practice, but a place where I think this is what temples and churches and across the spectrum and mosques and they're all meant as a place of refuge, because this is what we seek in our spiritual practice. We seek that freedom from suffering. So this refers, satana refers to shelter, protection, or sanctuary, a place of peace and safety. And gamana refers to the act of returning. So that's where the Japanese verb kairu, the use of that comes from. I think refuge for me, I didn't quite get that sense of refuge as a place of safety and protection, and also as a something we return to when I first heard taking refuge. But one of the things that Rev points out is that the word refugee points to the idea of fleeing, or fleeing to something, or flying to something. So I think that's interesting, because it does, to me, it does speak to what we come to spiritual practice for. We're fleeing from suffering. Most of us come to this practice because we're trying to find some freedom from our suffering, and somehow spiritual practice represents that. So then he goes on to describe Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And in three different ways. Buddha as unsurpassed, correct, and complete awakening. So this, I think, points to our own ability to find that freedom. I think we can't be bodhisattva, we can't do bodhisattva practice unless we have an experience of spiritual freedom. And so this unsurpassed, correct, this word correct is a little weird, but, and complete awakening, actually, you find this in the Heart Sutra. It originally was Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, and that's the way I learned it. But now it's unsurpassed, complete, perfect enlightenment, I think. I think that's a translation that's been determined. It's one of those things scholars weren't going to translate because it's hard to translate. But anyway, it's the awakening. It's the complete awakening that we experience through Zazen. And Dogen Zenji says we experience it every time we do Zazen. We experience this awakening. And my understanding of what he's saying is that when we sit and do nothing, Shikantaza, when we, as I say, resist the compulsion to do something, as we would resist the compulsion to have a destination when we take a walk. If not, Han suggests we take a walk without a destination. But at first he says you have to resist that inclination to want to make a destination. And then when you just walk without a destination, then you see the scenery. I say if you want to walk without a destination, just follow your dog. It works. But anyway, this happens when we practice Shikantaza, because oh yeah, we notice where our mind is really busy. But at that moment when we notice it, just letting go of that busyness, you know? And when we just, even for a moment, let go of that busyness, we experience life as it is, which is impermanent and interconnected. We experience that. And then we get back into our thinking. Maybe we think, oh, I'm thinking I shouldn't be doing this. What should I do about it? And then we're thinking again. Whatever we do that gets us back into that thinking, then we notice it again. And each time that we notice it, it doesn't have quite as much of a hold on us. So this experience is something that we, over time, we begin to identify even. And then we recognize that Zazen allows us to have that experience. That's the experience of letting go. That's the experience of freedom. That's the experience of being part of everythingness. You know, Shunyata is called emptiness, but actually it's talking about everythingness. And then, so the second description of Buddha is a person who realizes such awakening. And then the third description of Buddha is the transformation of beings. That transformation can happen in any moment. At any moment that we let go of our delusion. You know, Zazen helps us learn how to do it. It's called practice. Practice and doing it by not having anything that's distracting us, just looking at a wall, just being with whatever comes up. Our delusion, our awakenings, our sadness, our confusion, all that. And, you know, it's not all sadness and confusion. Sometimes we have those moments of, wow, I'm happy to be here right now in this moment. And so all of that's part of the experience. And, you know, recognizing both parts of the experience is really important. Not just the difficult parts that we have to look at and don't want to be there to look at, but when we look at it, we realize it's not such a big deal. It's just something that our mind turned into a big deal. And recognizing that, but also those moments of, wow, you know, I've got some good qualities. You know, those things that flower watering that we were doing last night at the full moon gathering. What is something that I can recognize about myself and say, yeah, that's a good thing. Because when we recognize those good qualities, then it helps us to use them. So those are the three aspects he talks about Buddha. And then he talks about Dharma, which he describes as freedom from any difference between ourselves and Buddha. Those moments of freedom from judgment, freedom from discrimination, when we can say, hey, yeah, here's a good quality about myself. Or, hey, delusion, this is just delusion. This is just my mind doing this. that freedom that comes there, the freedom from differentiation, from difference. Dogen Zenji says, you know, in the Heart Sutra, we shouldn't really be saying form is emptiness and emptiness is form. We should be saying form is form, or emptiness is emptiness. Realizing that within form is emptiness, and within emptiness is form. Otherwise, we're making a distinction between relative and absolute. And maybe even saying one is preferred. So realizing that they're both part of the same reality. So say form is form. But as soon as I heard that, I thought, oh my gosh, you know, I do think about it in that way. I do think about form, how does form change over to emptiness, and how does emptiness change over to form? But really, it's all part of the same reality. So we can't actually, you know, see those moments. Then he says, Dharma is, so the first one is freedom from any difference between ourselves and Buddha. So Dogen Zenji says, well, Buddhism says everything has Buddha nature, but actually, everything is Buddha nature. So when we were talking about it in the study group several years ago, people in the study group were saying, yeah, I can't understand that, because that means that I am part of Buddha nature. Yeah, that's what it means. Can we recognize that? No. That's what that recognition of interdependence is about. Everything is Buddha nature. Everything is Buddha nature. Not everything has, but everything is Buddha nature. That's also Dharma. And it's also Dharma, he says, the truth that is realized by a Buddha. Buddha means awakened person. So Dharma describes the truth. It describes our experience of the truth, and it describes the truth itself as is described in the sutras or in the teachings. So he then goes on to say the transformation of that truth into scriptures and other forms of teaching. So that's called the Dharma truth. And Sangha, harmony. You know, Thich Nhat Hanh says Sangha is the community of mindful harmony. And here Rev is saying Sangha, one of the meanings of Sangha is harmony. Probably that comes from the Pali, I'm guessing. And then he says, the community of those who practice the truth realized by Buddha. And the release of beings from suffering and bondage to the world of birth and death. Bondage to the world of birth and death. So the release of beings from suffering and bondage to the world of birth and death. So the bondage to the world of birth and death means our mental distinctions between birth and death. Birth and death are not two different things. They're part of the same life. They're just, as Kadagir Rosh used to say, if you take a glass and scoop some water out of the ocean, it creates a form. It makes the water into a form. And if you pour that water back into the ocean, it's the same water, but when it had form, we call it a glass of water, or our form is human life, but we're biodegradable, we get recycled, so we go back into the ocean of life. But it's the same life, we just have a form right now. And it will have a different form after we die, for this. But we have this bondage. This is a bondage of, he's talking about suffering and the bondage of the world of birth and death. So we get attached to human life. For some reason, in humans, part of the human existence is to try and grasp onto life, our human life. And, you know, that's good because it keeps us alive long enough to kind of try and figure out what life is. And maybe, I don't know, maybe that helps us. Who knows? But anyway, here we are, and here we are attached to human life. So we try to extend it as long as possible and try to get it. And but there is some suffering involved when we think when we are attached to human life. Particularly, I'm sure at the time of death, there's a bit of difficulty. So that's how he talks about Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha in these three different ways. And then he goes on, I just took little pieces from Suzuki Roshi said that we can't practice the way without adoring the triple treasures, and that taking refuge is an act of adoration. And then Rev goes on to flesh out what those acts of adoration are. Adoration of awakening, adoration of the teaching of awakening. Awakening means recognizing something besides what it's all about me. Just recognizing that it's possible to get outside of that. And when we do, that is freedom from suffering. So adoration of awakening, and adoration of the teaching of awakening, adoration of the community of beings who practice the way of awakening, adoration of all of life. Adoration is, you know, kind of a powerful word. It's probably not the one that I would use, but it does kind of bring up that kind of deeper sense of appreciation. I might use the word devotion, but even devotion can be kind of sappy. But anyway, you know, when I think about this, I'm actually feeling something. So, you know, that sense of reverence. So the triple treasures and taking refuge are acts of reverence, acts of kind of awakening our spirit of reverence. In all traditions of Buddhism, veneration of the triple treasure is the basis of ethical practices and compassionate vows. So those are the first three of the 16 Bodhisattva precepts. And maybe that's why they're the first three, and maybe that's why they're the ones that are the most used in all traditions for all at all levels of practice, wherever you are in your practice. Taking refuge in Buddha, returning to Buddha, is an antidote to running away from yourself. To come back to just be the way you are, including all your delusions, is to take refuge in Buddha. So not judging delusions. Taking refuge in Buddha is trusting that you are Buddha. And that trust, you know, it's partially, you know, getting past reminding ourselves that I am Buddha, that I am Buddha nature, I am part of Buddha nature, and really be trusting that is true. But also I think that kind of trust really goes back to trusting something which some people call intuition, but trusting our our first response, trusting and noticing our first response before we make a judgment about whether that was the right response or whether, before we hit our kind of resistance to our first response. Because our first response to anything, to someone walking in the room, may not be, oh, what an inspiring, happy person. It may be, oh, is that something I want to take on? Or it may be, oh, and then we say, how are you? And the person says, I'm fine. And then our mind computes fine and forgets our initial response. All of those things that we do to not acknowledge our first response to any given situation, to not see our given response or our first response, all of that judgment that comes up, takes over, keeps us from being able to really experience the freedom of life and our interaction with other beings. When we sit together, and particularly when we sit sashimi, we find that at least after the first day or two, when we're still arriving from our busyness of our life, when we just start tending to settle, we start to find that our response to each thing is more easy, or even our response to getting up in the morning comes with more ease, and that has to do, I think, with just sitting with and practicing again and again, that coming back, letting go, noticing the things that we do, all the things that come up when we just sit down and shut up. The meaning of saying I take refuge in Buddha is not in the words, but it responds to our devotion in saying these words. If our devotion is total, if we give our whole lives to being awake, awakening will be realized. If we devote our entire lives to the Dharma, the teachings of awakening will come alive. But if we dedicate our whole lives to Sangha, the community of all beings, the community will appear in this world. And I was thinking, when he talked about, devoting ourselves to the Sangha, and, the Sangha is, the image of the Sangha is the way potatoes are washed in Asia. They put them in a bucket and they put in some water and they roll them around. The potatoes all wash each other. That's how Sangha is described, And when you practice with other people, all those interpersonal issues come up even within silence, And so, we get pissed off at each other, and we get annoyed by people's habits that are interfering with our peace. And all of these things happen when we practice together in Sangha. And it's such a good opportunity to practice, to learn about ourselves through our difficulties with others, because when we learn how to do that with others who are trying to do this practice together, it helps us to sort of see the bigger world as Sangha, seeing our families as Sangha, seeing our people we might work with, our bigger interactions as Sangha, and even our positions in the political world. How can we bring what we learn from practicing together with others. How can we bring that into the bigger world that we live in? And I don't remember exactly what the context of this is, but he brought up something that Kageru Roshi evidently talked about one time when he was teaching at it, San Francisco, and he made a big point of putting the incense in straight. I always say put the incense in straight, because if you put it in right in the center and you put it straight, it won't make a mess all over the altar. So that's my pragmatic approach to it. But he said, Kageru Roshi said, if you put the incense straight, your mind will be straightforward. You know? And if you get into the habit of doing things like that as practices of mindfulness, we have so many practices of mindfulness that we do, and particularly in Sesshin, you know, even the practice of Oryoki and paying attention to how we use the bowls and the little rituals that are around it. But if you get in the habit of knowing that you need to put the incense straight, it really helps you see where your mind is when you put the incense in it. You straighten your mind, just kind of has to straighten out in order to get it straight. You know, I always tell the story about when I was doing the ceremony by myself. It's called Dok Choka or Dok Banka. It was afternoon ceremony, and sometimes when everybody's busy doing something, they just have one person represent everybody and do it. So you represent the person who's offering the incense, the doshi, you represent the person who's ringing the bells, and you represent the community. And so I went up, and I was in a hurry because I was late. So I went up and I put the incense in, and it was crooked, but nobody was there, and I was in a hurry. And so I went back out, and I heard a voice behind me say, Teijo-san, put the incense straight. So somebody was walking through, and they saw me do this, and immediately I had to go back, and I was like, yeah, you know, should always do it, no matter what, even if you're late. It really did bring my mind to it. So it really works. When you take refuge and give your devotion to the Buddha way, there's always a response. He started out by saying, ring the bell wholeheartedly, and it will be turning the wheel of Dharma. You know, I went out to a monastic gathering at the Land of Medicine Buddha, which is, I think near Santa Cruz in California. Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a Tibetan place. And so it's really amazing, you know, because that part of California is, to me, is just such a maze of freeways and, you know, businesses, and it's, you know, and I drive into Land of Medicine Buddha, and it's just this place. It's just, you're talking about a place of refuge. It just feels like that. It's so, you know, and anyway, they have this big bell there, or not a bell, medicine wheel. Yeah. And medicine wheels evidently have lots of prayers and have all the Dharma in them, and then when you turn it, it's a way of just, you know, kind of sharing the Dharma. And so he said, when you ring the bell wholeheartedly, it will be turning the wheel. It sort of made me think about that, because, you know, every time I saw that medicine wheel, I really wanted to turn it. And I just really felt like something happened when I turned it. And I had the little ones too, you know, when Han gives talks down at Urban Dharma, he constantly is turning this little wheel. And it really is true, you know. Thich Nhat Hanh came to Tassajara when I was there, and he was teaching us about mindfulness and mindfulness gathas. And his mindfulness gatha for ringing the bell is it starts with inviting the bell to sound. And I remember the first time I had to ring the bensho, I thought about, inviting the bell to sound. I didn't want to hit the bell. You know, I wanted to just, you know, draw out the sound. And the relationship that I had with that bell, it felt like, you know, what he's talking about here is that when you ring the bell wholeheartedly, it will be turning the wheel. It's like more than just ringing the bell. It's wholeheartedly doing something. You know? Just like when we wholeheartedly do this practice, it's like ringing the bell wholeheartedly. And then he said, when you take refuge and give your devotion to the Buddha way, there's always a response. That's like ringing the bell wholeheartedly. So let's see, it's, what time is it? Oh, it's 10:51. Well, I'm not going to talk about the 3 pure precepts, I guess. So I think that maybe it's enough, you know, in light of what Dogen said, that the 3 refuges are as a part of the Buddha's teaching or something like that, which the Buddha Dharma is expressed fully in the 3 refuges. I think if we think of the 3 refuges as a practice of returning to these different aspects of what life is, which we have to know because we are part of it. It's just returning to something we already know. I said to somebody recently, you know, I met Kagyu Roshi in San Francisco. Strangely, he was visiting and I was visiting, and I got pulled to his lecture at Greenbelt, but then I went back to Minnesota and started practicing with him and listening to his talks. And you know, I could only understand a little of them because his pronunciation of English was very difficult to understand. But there would always be something that would just pop out at me. And one day, I thought, I already know what he's talking about. It was like he awakened something in me by talking about the Dharma. And he talked about it very wholeheartedly. This is what I experienced when I heard Rev talking about this at the Jukai. I felt like he was talking about something that, you know, the fact that he was writing notes as he was walking in there meant it was really alive, you know. He wasn't reiterating something, he was revisiting Kyoji Kaimon and Dogen's teachings about it. And so I think that if we only think about these 3 refuges for the rest of the sitting, and just think about them as a way to return to truth, a way to return to the truth that we already know, a way to awaken to that. This is what really Sesshin, but Zazen, allows us to experience or brings up the experience of. We have 6 minutes. Does anybody have anything they have to say or they want to say? May the merit of this practice
May the merit of this practice
benefit all beings
benefit all beings
and bring peace
and bring peace